we are talking about integration, renewable energy integration in particular, with respect to the future grid. I would first like to mention the primary objectives at this point of time when it comes to the government or the policymakers. It is the reliable and affordable and quality power for all. That is number one. And a higher share of renewable energy into that system. Now, trying to achieve these objectives, we see a dramatic shift in the landscape from centralized generation to distributed generation. Today, even a rooftop becomes a generating point. That's a complete paradigm shift which has happened. From unidirectional power flow to bidirectional power flow. Earlier, we were only considering few large power plants, always generating for the sake of consumption all across. But today, the power generation point could be a rooftop energy source as well. Then we have the third change in the landscape, which is from a well-regulated generation to managing volatile generation. This is a very fundamental change in the way the grid needs to be managed. And that's the thing that has been brought about by the expanding network of renewable energy. So generation is no longer the challenge anymore. I think we all know that solar, wind, these technologies have stabilized. They will also evolve further, but at this point of time, with reasonable confidence, we say that they are achieving almost close to grid parity or better than grid parity, etc. But the real challenge is going to be the grid integration, which means how do you manage this changing landscape into a grid which has remained there for decades. It's a decade-old, several decade-old grid which needs to manage this complete change in electrical landscape. That's the real challenge, and that challenge is going to be bigger and bigger with more and more renewable energy generation points being plugged into this grid. And the strategies that we see today in managing that grid are not going to be the same strategies 5 years from now or 10 years from now, because that strategy will evolve as the penetration of renewable energy progresses within our grid. Now, there are several strategies that, of course, the designers of grids deploy. One, of course, is the traditional hydro pumped storage, which is the one large utility scale energy storage solution that can help to stabilize grid when you have very wildly fluctuating power scenario. Renewable energy will typically have this problem that you can have 100 megawatt of power just switching out of the grid in a very short span of time, and it needs to be balanced by either spinning reserve, or it needs to be balanced by pumped storage. And between the night and the daytime, the timelines of the peak power and the peak supply availability are quite different. And to bring them in sync is a massive challenge. And if we could store the power during the peak generation time and use it during the peak consumption time, this problem fundamentally could be resolved. So we need large-scale storage, and the storage technologies have not produced a very significant breakthrough as of yet. But there are technologies like silicon carbide and things like that, which could be a quantum leap into the future when storage around batteries further evolve. But until that happens, what are the options that we have? On one hand, of course, we have the pumped storage as a utility scale energy storage possibility. On the other side, we can manage the demand as if we can shrink and expand the demand at our will. What are the technologies that can make it possible? Those are the smart grid technologies which are coming into the picture. That on the demand side, if let's say we could have rather than a complete load shedding of an area, if we could switch off some of the high power consuming devices in every home when it's the peak power consumption period, how much that would have helped. That our lights remain on, air conditioning is running, whereas our geysers are off, or there are other high power consuming devices which we do not switch on during that period. And that is administered through these intelligent devices being embedded into all the future consumer durables, like refrigerator or a geyser or an air conditioner. When those equipment become intelligent and start communicating, it provides the managing of that managing capability of all those devices across territories without shutting down power completely. And these are the technologies which are going to help us in further deployment of grid integration of renewable energy. These technologies are partially existing and partially evolving. And directions are fairly identified and well known. How quickly they evolve is a very exciting period that we are passing through, and India has taken a very, very bold initiative to for the greening of the grid, to raise the renewable energy share, and these are some of the technologies that will good street. That's my point of view.